My name's Susan Jackson. I'm the chairperson of Early Childhood Australia, South Australia. And I'd like to welcome you all to the 2026 Early Childhood Australia, South Australian Election Forum. We will more formally introduce our guests shortly, but many thanks to each of the candidates for making the time in a busy election campaign to come and talk to us tonight. We really do appreciate it, and it's wonderful to hear like an early childhood focus on the election campaign. Thanks also to all the early childhood educators, teachers and service leaders who have spent the day working with children before coming here tonight. We recognise it is a long day, but we're very pleased to see you all here. We're very grateful to be part of a national organisation and to have Sam Page, the CE of Early Childhood Australia, fly in to MC this event. So it's wonderful to know that we are part of that large organisation. We have BU representatives here who are employed through ECA National, and Payman and Sarah have been amazing in helping us to get this all organised. So along with the South Australian Committee, we have had amazing help from ECA National. We have a membership of nearly 4,000 individual and organisation members from across the early childhood sector. Our members come from a diversity of early childhood education and care service types, including preschool, long day care, child and family centres, family daycare, in-home care, distance education, flexible, hybrid service types, the early years of school and playgroups. It's not limited to those groups of people, so people who work with early childhood or are connected in any way are welcome to join and be members. We're also joined by colleagues from VET, university sectors, family services, allied health and health services. I'm really pleased to see a diverse group of participants with us here this evening. Thank you particularly to fellow South Australian Committee and South Australian members who have helped to make this forum possible. In a moment, we will hear from the candidates about their aspirations for young children and the policy priorities of their respective parties. But before we do, I would like to invite Auntie Suzanne to welcome us to country. Auntie Suzanne is a Kaurna elder and a traditional owner. She's a consultant on Aboriginal cultural issues, an experienced educator, and has been a leader of a children's centre, which is the same position that I'm working in at the moment, and made significant contributions in her roles as Deputy Chair and Executive Officer on the South Australian Aboriginal Education and Training Advisory Committee. Auntie Suzanne has been with our committee for a long period of time now, and it's wonderful to have her join us and do her special welcomes to country. So can you join me in welcoming Auntie Suzanne?
On your tables, you'll find a little piece of me. My moiety is emu. In Scotland, people have a similar thing where they belong to clans and they have a coat of arms. We, Ghana, and many other Aboriginal nations, we have ours. So I am emu and I am also black swan. Primarily emu is what I come from. I'm going to suggest that at this point, what I'd like you to do is to, everybody please just lower the shoulders, drop what's in your hands and just Big exhale. Exhale until it's empty, empty, empty. Inhale. 30% of our old air always remains, and it's good for us to exhale the bottom, because then we are then taking in new oxygen to let us nourish. I'm going to take you on a little journey. Could you please, if you wish, could you close your eyes? Deep, long breathing. Inside your shoes, I want you to curl up your toes until you can't curl them anymore. Feel the discomfort and release. I want you in this state of quietness. Please imagine that there's a giant filing case in front of you. In there, I want you to take from your cognitive mind all of those hundreds of things, and I want you to imagine that they are filing themselves in the filing cabinet. They are flying in, out of your mind, out of your worry, out of your heart. All these things are flooding into the filing cabinet. Your hands are now on the filing cabinet drawer and they're pushing it closed. Every single one of us has a right to our own peacefulness. You have your own license for peacefulness. Own it and celebrate it. Come back to me. A moment ago, I just went outside for a quick little, and I gathered some leaves for me to hold in my hand, to crush and inhale and feel the wonderment of this country. I'm going to ask you fellas, I'll say a sentence, and I want you fellas to say the sentence that I just did say, and I want you to say it to someone on your table. And at that point in time, we are humans. We are loved. We are treasured. Yes, we have workload issues, but take this time. I'll say the first sentence, and I want you to say to the sentence with thoughtfulness and presence. Here we go. My partner will say it back to me. This land belongs to all of us.
This land belongs to all of us.
But it first belonged to Ghana.
But it first belonged to Ghana.
We thank and acknowledge the Ghana.
We thank and acknowledge the Ghana.
It is our responsibility to take care of people and country.
It is our responsibility to take care of people and country.
Thank you. I'll say it in our beautiful Ghana language. Yanjiata nadlu matana, Ghana miana ninku yarcha, kumanka, ganganatha, Nachalia, that's thank you, Nachalia Ghana miana. Guess what? We started, I'm a dinosaur, but she's not.
Equal.
Yeah. I started in 1987, 88, and we haven't stopped.
Go with that.
We haven't stopped since then. I'm the dinosaur walking this country of ours. We are here so that we can give our utmost, encourage staff, love your staff. We are here because we love our children and we love our country, that we have the opportunity to grow up in peace. Have peace, brothers and sisters.
Thank you so much, Auntie Suzanne. You always make us all feel so welcome and so generously share this country, but also your wisdom and your peace. So what a lovely way to start this evening. And I'm delighted to be here. As Susan mentioned, I'm usually in Canberra, but it is delightful to be in Adelaide today. What a stunner of a day. And of course there is, national interest in the South Australian election, as there should be. We're really keen to hear from the candidates tonight about their aspirations for young children and families and the early childhood sector and profession. The evening is an opportunity for you to hear from and engage with the candidates with an interest and commitment to early childhood and early childhood education and care. It is a conversation. We do ask that we're all professionally respectful and courteous to one another, even where we might have different views. It's not meant to be a debate tonight. It really is a conversation. And we will invite each of the candidates to give a summary of their policy positions. Then we will pose some questions that have come from questions that delegates have provided in the registration process. And then if we have time, we'll open up to the floor as well. So if you have a question arising from something that one of the candidates talks about tonight, then make sure you let me know that you've got a question to ask. So now I'll introduce each of the candidates as they come up to the stage. We'll start with the Honourable Blair Boyer, Minister for Education, Training and Skills from the Australian Labor Party. Blair lives in the north-eastern suburbs of Adelaide with his wife and 3 daughters. He grew up on the family farm in rural southwest Victoria, not far from Mount Gambier. He was elected to represent the state electorate of Wright in 2018 and was appointed Minister for Education, Training and Skills in 2022 and Minister for Police in September 2025. Blair is passionate about education and early childhood education, and we've really appreciated that, Minister, in your time in the portfolio, and believes that a strong, affordable and accessible public education system is the key to equality. Please make the Minister feel welcome. It's also my pleasure to welcome the Honourable Michelle Lensink MLC, Shadow Minister for Human Services, who's here with us tonight on behalf of Jack Batty, who is the Shadow Minister for Education from the South Australian Liberal Party but wasn't able to come tonight. And we really do appreciate, Michelle, the fact that you're stepping in on a portfolio that's not usually your responsibility, but we do really welcome your involvement tonight. Michelle was elected to the Legislative Council in the South Australian Parliament in 2003. Her parliamentary career has included holding various portfolios, including human services, water and the River Murray, early childhood development, environment, conservation and the status of women. In 2018, Michelle was appointed Minister for Human Services in the Marshall Liberal Government. For 4 years, she was responsible for a number of frontline policy areas, including homelessness, social housing, domestic and family violence, youth justice, communities, volunteers, disabilities, women and youth. That's quite a list. Michelle is currently the Shadow Minister for Planning, Shadow Minister for Housing, Shadow Minister for Human Services and Shadow Minister for Women, as well as Shadow Minister for the Prevention of Domestic, Family and Sexual Violence. Please make Michelle feel very welcome. And our third candidate tonight, we welcome the Honourable Robert Simms MLC, who's here with us from the Australian Greens. Robert is the spokesperson for education, and over the past decade he has been a passionate advocate for progressive values and South Australian communities at every level of government. Prior to entering state parliament, Robert served as a senator for South Australia and a City of Adelaide area councillor. Robert is committed to fighting for giving every child a fair start. The Greens have been long-term advocates of scrapping school fees and providing free school breakfast and lunch programs, so I'm sure we'll hear more about that. During this term of Parliament, Robert has also advocated a range of measures to protect the environment, take action on climate change, tackle the housing crisis and provide cost of living relief. Please welcome Robert. We'll invite each of our candidates to give a brief summary of their policy positions, and we'll start with you, Blair.
Well, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much, Sam, to you for making the effort to be here this evening, and to the ECA more broadly for going to all this effort to put this forum on. Sue, of course, to you. Auntie Suzanne, thank you for your fantastic welcome to country, and could I also acknowledge that we're gathered on Kaurna land, and acknowledge Rob Simms and Michelle Lensink MLCs as well, who are here tonight. I just want to say I'm not going to spend long on my prepared comments, because I think there's the opportunity for us all to take a lot of questions, which is great. But it is fantastic to see a pre-election forum, not so much debate, but a forum focusing on early childhood, because that is historically not been the case. And the issues that are talked about and debated in the last couple of weeks before a state election tend to be about other things. And I think we all know in this room how important this area is. But I think despite that sometimes, as the Minister, being in forums like this means you have to answer difficult questions, I really appreciate the opportunities, I'm sure Michelle and Rob do, to be able to actually draw some attention and shine a light on such an important area of public policy, just 9 days away from a state election. So if I could just give it perhaps a brief overview about not just what we have done as a state government in the last 4 years, but also where we hope to head should we be given another 4 years in government. I think I don't need to tell people in this room that the early years have been underappreciated and under-recognised for a long, long time, and have never been seen in the kind of prism of economic development and economic opportunity that it should be. It's always been seen as people characterise it as just childcare, or something which sits outside the education system and is not important as those primary and secondary years which come after it. We all know that's wrong, but I think there is a case to be made that now that view would be more damaging to our state in terms of where we sit in terms of the opportunity that's in front of us than ever before. Because the truth is, the state's economy is in a good place. We have low unemployment. We have a whole series of big projects which are sort of here now and on the horizon and will be for decades to come. They all share, though, the exact same challenge, and that is finding the skilled workforce to be able to do the work and realise the economic benefit for our state. Now, the work to do that and find that skilled workforce and make sure that we can predominantly find it here in South Australia and give young South Australians those opportunities doesn't start at primary school, it starts in the early years. In fact, when we look at all that data that we have now about the first 5 years of life, I think we can actually say that it starts in the first 5 yees in a way which is possibly more profound than the years that come after it. And we need to not just invest in those years for benefits of a child's own personal development, but also in terms of making sure when they move on to primary school and high school that they then finish their schooling in a position to go into the workforce or do whatever it is that they wish to do with their lives in a meaningful way. And I've been very conscious of that, as has the Malinascus team in the last 4 years. You'll hear me talk about 3-year-old preschool a bit tonight, but that is not the only thing that we are of course, doing, but it is a $1.9 billion commitment over 9 years. And the first recommendation out of all those recommendations that was made by Julia Gillard was to lower the level of developmental vulnerability from where it sits now, which is around 24% or more, down to 15% across the next 20 years. Why is that important? Because that is about those 5 domains measured by the AEDC at 5 years of age, in terms of how that young person is going, in terms of their cognitive, physical, language, social, emotional skills. And those, there's a lot of familiar faces in the room, but those who have involvement in our primary school years will tell you, as will I, that what we are seeing in terms of some of the challenges and struggles that young people are presenting to primary school with now, more so than they used to, are a factor of being developmentally vulnerable in one or more of those 5 areas. We are seeing an increase in things like violence in the primary school years because kids are vulnerable around the social and emotional areas. If we don't do more to invest in those years and have those young people start their first day of primary school in a position to sit down and learn and make friends and do all those sorts of things, the odds of them finishing high school and being in a place where they can go and take one of those jobs that we have and do it successfully is greatly diminished. So I might leave my comments there because I know there'll be lots of questions later on, but I just wanted to frame, I guess, my remarks tonight around the fact that it's time we actually started looking and investing in the early years as an economic lever for our state. All the other things that we know that are important about the early years remain important, but we have to start talking about it as an investment that our state gets a return on, and that's what we have been focused on as a government, and if we're lucky enough to get 4 more years, it's what we'll continue to focus on. Thank you.
Thank you. And Michelle, would you like to come and make some opening remarks?
Thank you, Sam, and thank you to the board and all the people who've organised tonight. It's wonderful to be here, and thank you, Auntie Suzanne, for your lovely welcome to country. I felt so calm after that. I wish you came to every forum and made us feel so nurtured and special. Thank you very much. To my parliamentary colleagues, it's always good to see you. In terms of our vision, I think the vision that you can take from the Liberal Party is to reflect on the 4 years that we were in government. I had the benefit of the person that I call the encyclopedia of these issues, John Gardner, who I happen to live in his electorate. So he came and prepped me in my kitchen this morning, and it was on all of your priorities and these things, but it was fantastic to sit with him because it brought back memories of the discussions that we used to have at cabinet meetings. We actually had we had several sub-cabinets in Stephen Marshall's cabinet, one which was the Social Affairs subcommittee, which included health. I looked after DHS, John had education, and we had child protection. And so a lot of our focus, and if you cast your mind back to the Early Intervention Research Directorate, when we came in, that was finishing its reporting, and I think there has been quite a few building blocks that have been built upon the work of Fraser Mustard in the past to articulate the importance of the first 1,000 days. So I think it's probably fair to say that there is bipartisan, multi-partisan support, a much better understanding. Obviously, for those of you who are here, it's very front of mind for you every day at the coalface, working day in, day out with young children on their educational and other needs. But I think it's fair to say it's one of those areas that has reached the consciousness of those of us in these roles who I often say in politics, we're jack of all trades and master of none, and the people in this room, as far as I'm concerned, are the subject experts, and we take our advice from you. South Australia obviously has a strong history with the kindergarten sector that goes back many decades. I think South Australia's had a lot of those early social recognition for some things in certain sectors, and what everybody is seeking to do is to make sure that those who are particularly developmentally vulnerable, as the Minister mentioned, receive much more targeted supports so that they can have the same outcomes into the future as the rest of their peers. We do know that South Australia, that vulnerable index has been higher, close to 25%, and that is something that we are all working towards reducing. So certainly when we're in government, there was very much a focus on linking up all of the different parts of the puzzle. There's the work that you do, but there's a whole lot of the other parts of the portfolio so that we're not working in silos, but we're making those connections, particularly for vulnerable families. So we all want to make sure that children achieve their greatest potential outcomes, not just educationally, but socially, so that they've got the skills that they need across that spectrum, across that span of need. And so I think what we're all working towards in a policy sense is how we can lift those standards, how we can make sure that there's enough workforce to address the gaps in the services that we have at the moment. So I'm looking forward to the rest of the segments and the more specific details in the next segment.
Thank you. And I should have checked that you're comfortable with me using your first names. I'm sorry, it just gets a bit awkward if we keep using formal titles, so I hope you don't mind. We are going to move into a bit more of a conversation. Can I now welcome Robert to make some opening statements?
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to come along and speak tonight, and great to be here with my parliamentary colleagues. Might I say I think we are very lucky in our state that we can have political debates like this where we can talk about ideas, and certainly I look at some of the things that are unfolding around the world at the moment, and I do feel very thankful that we live in South Australia and that I can share the podium with two parliamentary colleagues that I like, who I know are passionate about these issues. Look, I'm in a slightly different position to Michelle and Blair, because my party is very unlikely to be in government in a few weeks' time. Although, based on the way the opinion polls are going these days, who knows? State politics is becoming increasingly unpredictable, but it's not likely for me to be in government. But South Australians will face some very important choices in the days ahead. The first is around who will be in government in the lower house, and the second is around who will hold the balance of power in the upper house. Which party will hold whoever is in government to account, but also use its influence to try and scrutinise legislation and to amend things and to negotiate better outcomes. And that's where I think the Greens play a really important role. And that's where I can certainly make a commitment to you that you will have a sympathetic ear and somebody in the Parliament who will continue to raise the issues that are important to your sector. I agree with the comments that have been made by both Blair and Michelle that sometimes this is an area that is overlooked by government. It's pretty telling to note that in Parliament House, for instance, we have a bar, but we don't have a childcare centre. Pretty outrageous in 2026, and does demonstrate, I think, sometimes the warped priorities that we have as legislators. But from a Greens perspective, we believe that every child has a right to access quality early education and care. That should be high quality, and that's a fundamental right of each and every child, no matter where they live, no matter their postcode, and no matter what their parents earn. I also recognise that within your sector there are some significant challenges in terms of ongoing casualisation of the workforce, and that's an area that the Greens are absolutely aware of and keen to ensure that you get appropriate legislative protections. And that includes making sure we've got long-term funding and long-term commitments being made for the sector. I'm also aware from a parent's perspective around the preponderance of childcare deserts here in South Australia in areas that are neglected, particularly in regional areas, and that's something that the Greens are passionate about looking at. And indeed, just last week we announced a plan to have 20 new long daycare centres around the state. Now, we costed that at about $180 million. I know that Michelle and Blair will say, oh, how are you going to pay for that? That's a question everyone asks when a Green outlines a policy. But might I say budgets are about choices, and we've identified during this election campaign about $13 billion worth of savings that could be made if we got big corporations, mining corporations, big banks and the like to pay their fair share of tax. So my point is, when there's a will, there's a way. And so certainly you have a commitment from me that in the next Parliament, I will absolutely push to ensure that this is on the agenda and to make sure that when there are opportunities to amend government legislation and to get better outcomes, that we will do so and hold the government's feet to the fire, whether that be Blair, who's in power, or Michelle's party. Thanks very much. I look forward to your questions.
Blair, if I can start with you, what do you see as the strengths of South Australia's approach to supporting families and young children through those critical early years? You mentioned, South Australia does have a proud legacy in this area, but what do you see as the current strengths in the South Australian system?
Yeah, and I do think that, and Michelle touched upon that as well, and I think we do have a proud history in South Australia of being kind of reformers and people who are willing to do, or a sector or state that's willing to do things a bit differently in those areas, and I think it's important at this time that we kind of recapture that willingness to take a few risks and do things that other states and territories have not been doing, because if we want to have that kind of step change, whether it's developmental vulnerability or anything else, standing still and doing the same thing we've always done while the world is changing around us at a faster pace than ever is just not going to get you there. So you've got to be willing to do the kind of things I think that got South Australia that reputation in the first place, probably sort of through the 70s and 80s, 60s, 70s and 80s, that somewhere we lost. And I make this observation around education a lot. I think we lost it because we also lost our willingness to take risks and do things differently. I think we need to recapture that, and we are well placed to do that because of our size. We are excellent at trialling things that are different, and if the trial shows that it's worth doing more broadly, rolling it out quickly. And I won't bore people with the examples of where we've done that successfully, but I think we now have a really good sort of structure and framework that includes the organisations that we have pulled together as part of our rollout of 3-year-old preschool. And if we get another 4 years, continue the work with those groups to drive reform and changes in other areas of early childhood outside the strict kind of delivery of 3-year-old preschool, because we've built the relationships there. We've pulled all the parts of the sector kind of together. With the way that we are rolling out 3-year-old preschool, which is novel and different, we've proven that we can deliver complex public policy changes and service delivery. We should continue to do that, and I think that's what I would be focused on, and a future Malinaskis Labor government would be focused on, because that does draw on the strengths, the natural strengths that we have as a state in these areas, that some of the bigger eastern states with their size aren't nimble enough to be able to do those things so readily.
Lovely, thank you. Michelle, you mentioned this as well, and I must say when I came into the role at ECA, one of my first experiences was coming to South Australia and listening to Carla Rinaldi, who followed Fraser Mustard in the Thinkers in Residence. I do think South Australia has always been a thought leader on centring children and children's outcomes. Are there other strengths that you would like to build on if you're successful at the election?
Yes, certainly. I think the evidence base is critical. I referred to the Early Intervention Research Directorate, which isn't necessarily directly this space, but very much what we did in government was we took the advice of that and DHS took some of those services into it, which is very much focused on vulnerable families. And I think as long as we are very mindful of the evidence base driving good policy, and I think there's also I think we can build on the consensus of consecutive governments in that the work that John Gardner did in his thriving and learning and a range of things, including vulnerability checks. A lot of that stuff has continued. The current government had their policy, their election commitment last time of 3-year-old preschool. That's we're not going to throw things out and chop and change, which is, I think, what scares a lot of sectors where they think, a new incoming government's going to reverse all the previous decisions for the sake of kind of going, oh, look, we won and this is what we're doing and we're rebadging. And I think there's a consistency and that bipartisanship about a lot of these issues, and the appreciation from the political class about the first 1,000 days and the critical nature of, it's not just, you probably all heard this before, the language that, I got sent the language stuff, so I'm mindful. I'm referring to the stereotypes. It's not babysitting at all. Like it's the whole, the developmental learning phase is absolutely important to set children up for life. So I think there is that level of consistency amongst everyone to make sure that you can keep, as well as the innovation and reform that Blair's referring to, but there's not going to be chopping and changing along the way.
Lovely, thank you. And I shouldn't imply that it's whoever's successful, because it actually takes the whole parliament, doesn't it, to pass legislation and approve spending. And so, we're interested in the opinions of the major parties, regardless of the election outcome. Should clarify that. Robert, how do you see the strengths of the South Australian system, and what would you be looking for in terms of keeping whoever is in government accountable?
Look, I think I agree with Blair and Michelle's comments. I think the only thing I'd add is I think our workforce here is one of the key assets that we have here in South Australia. The workers is fundamental. And one of the things I'm kind of really conscious of is how do we keep people here in South Australia, but also keep people working in the sector. When I first started in Parliament, it was in the middle of COVID. And of course, a lot of us were dealing with working from home conditions. And I heard from so many parents the huge and new appreciation that they had for the work of people in early childhood and education and care in those sectors, because they suddenly got a real insight into the challenges that people confront in that workplace every day at a really micro level. And so I think what we can't afford to see happen is to lose good people from that sector because they feel undervalued or because they aren't being offered contracts that are favourable. And so certainly one of the things that I look out for as a legislator is how can we ensure that people working in this sector get the same rights and entitlements and protections as people working in other sectors, so that we can keep them as part of the workforce. So we don't lose them to other areas of the workforce, and so we don't lose them to other states. I think they're the key challenges.
Thank you. I'm going to combine a couple of questions because I think we are running a bit behind time. Staying with you, Robert, so where do you think we've got work to do to improve the way we support children and families, particularly in the prior to school years? But I'm going to combine that with what are your priorities for improving outcomes for children at risk of experiencing disadvantage? So that includes children with a disability or developmental delay, as well as those living in rural and remote communities and those households impacted by issues such as poverty.
Yeah, I think one of the things I am concerned about is children that are falling through the gaps because their parents are not in a position to be able to afford childcare, or simply because it's not accessible in their communities. I have been hearing a lot of reports of childcare, early childhood education being shifted to other industries to carry the burden. For instance, I had the opportunity to meet with some librarians recently that were talking to me about the fact that in some communities, parents are encouraging their kids after school to go along to the local library so that they get some support because there just isn't childcare available in their community. So I think we absolutely need to see appropriate government investment and government-run early childhood education happening in communities that have been under-resourced. We can't simply rely on those communities for the private sector to pick up the slack. An area that I'm really passionate about, and obviously it's a little bit older, but dealing with primary school students, is free school breakfasts and lunches. We had a parliamentary inquiry that looked at this, made some really good recommendations for a model that could be rolled out right across the state, and that's something that the Greens are absolutely going to keep pushing on. Thank you.
Michelle?
Thank you. Yes, so I think what are the next steps effectively is what you're asking is, so we've got a number of those extra vulnerability checks that are in place, which can get, families can connect to a whole range of things even in the community through those, whether it's playgroups or other local services. I think workforce, we're confronting a future workforce shortage for this sector that's going to need to be addressed. Investment in research, that's always incredibly important, I think, to make sure that not just that we're evaluating current programs, but also that we're looking at what other programs could be available. Rob's talked about the gaps. Rural and regional certainly is an area, and when we were in government after the Kangaroo Island bushfires, we managed to establish childcare at Pandana on site there, but that often requires some level of capital funding. So capital funding is certainly one of the things that can assist to provide those additional centres where there are those, as I think Rob's called them, childcare deserts. It's certainly an issue in a lot of areas, whether it's the southeast or the mid-north, or a whole range of areas where there's service gaps at the moment.
Thank you. And Blair?
The things I see as the real kind of priorities for whoever is in government the next 4 years, I often liken our long daycares, kindergartens, preschools, children's centres to, in many respects, being the canaries in the coal mine in terms of what they are seeing young South Australians present with and what changes they might be seeing. COVID is a great example in terms of, I guess, the challenges young people are facing more so than those generations before them post-COVID in terms of their, yes, developmental vulnerability, all those things we measure on the AEDC index. And I started hearing that a number of years ago from long daycare centres, from children's centres, from preschools, saying they're seeing higher levels of developmental vulnerability, lower levels of young people coming through who are toilet trained, a whole series of things which you quickly work out are soon going to be issues in primary schools and then high schools. And there is no doubt about it. You have a look at the most recent AEDC data, saw a big jump, particularly in Victoria where there were lockdowns, on those levels of developmental vulnerability. Huge leaps. And I think we have been focused for a number of years, and rightly so, on increasing supports for young people at primary and high school who might have additional challenges, whether it's a disability or whether it's something outside of that and more like some kind of learning challenge. But we, I think, need to move closer to that kind of system for our early years services to be able to have more of that kind of additional support wrapped around those kids, which I think traditionally we have sort of not done and thought that's what we do once they get to primary school if they still need it. Now, of course, there is a very big funding implication that is involved in that. We have sought to do some of that through our Flying Start reforms with Preschool Plus, so the 30 hours of teacher-led play-based learning for those kids who really need it. Preschool Boost, which is access for some of those sites who are partners to get some of those extra services in to support those kids and families. But the truth is a lot more needs to be done if we are actually going to address the levels of disadvantage and need that are presenting in those first 5 years, whereas both Rob and Michelle have said 90% of brain development is done. That is where the best investment is made. I think we need to do more of that early because we're going to see this issue certainly not go away. I think probably just become more pronounced.
Yes, and particularly as we build a more universal system, we have more children coming into services at a younger age. So it's really critical that we get that support right. Do you, and there were a number of delegates that asked questions about thriving kids and how that might work in South Australia. I'm not sure how much you can share with us at this point in time, but I think people would be interested if there's likely to be changes to the way inclusion support is provided, both to the preschools, but also, I know it's federal government funding the inclusion support program and Thriving Kids, but the state governments are involved in those decisions. How do you see that working?
Yeah, thanks, Sam. We are following this very, very closely. I am following this very, very closely. Whoever gets to do my job in 10 days is going to be dealing with this a lot across the next 4 years, let me tell you that, because it is absolutely true the federal government, no matter who it is, Labor or Liberal, or perhaps a federal Greens government, Rob, is going to have to do something about the growth in the NDIS. It's unsustainable. But, of course, to do something about that necessitates slowing the amount of money going in. And I am still a bit concerned about where those It's not necessarily a cut because it will continue to grow, but where the reductions are made. So we do need to watch that very carefully, because I'm always concerned, as the Minister responsible for the early years and education, that the federal government will look to preschools and kindergartens and primary schools and high schools about where they could reduce the level of support. So we need to be careful, because the demand is growing, and Thriving Kids, I think, there is a little bit of a risk there that support is taken away from some young people who still really need it. Totally understand the federal government has to do something, but it's going to be incumbent upon all the state and territory ministers to watch their own patches very, very closely, and to make sure that those, in this case, young South Australians and families relying on that support still find a way of getting that support. So there'll be a bit of a rough patch, but I think we can work with the federal government, or whoever's in government here, to make sure those families and young people are protected.
Thank you. Michelle or Robert, would you like to add to that, or am I getting into the weeds a little bit?
Yeah, look, it's hard when you're not attending those ministerial councils to actually know what the latest is. I certainly know the struggle that Blair's talking about when it comes to tensions between state and Commonwealth governments, because, my experience with the NDIS when we came in is the rollout had commenced, and there was a whole lot of services that used to be state that just went into the NDIS. I think there's some things that never should have gone. I think it's too complex, but it's a bit hard to unscramble that egg. So I think, as Blair said, it's incumbent on the states and territories to really be very careful that the feds don't just say, I've heard this from them, federal ministers just say, you guys just waste money all the time, but they're not very good at service delivery in the federal government. Never have been, never will be.
Something we can all agree on.
It's something we can all agree on. They've royally messed up the NDIS, in my opinion, but don't get me started down that rabbit hole.
Robert, you didn't want to... Angela and I were both on the advisory group for Thriving Kids, and I think there was a lot of goodwill about trying to make sure it works, and a lot of concern that young children, the individual funding model of diagnosis basis doesn't really work for children under 9. But you're right, it's a bit hard to see exactly what it's going to look like state by state. Yeah.
Can I add something short? You're right, and Angela's here, who's done great work as well. And I think everyone's doing it with the best of intentions. And the federal government and Mark Butler too, it's just one of those really, really difficult problems that governments have to face. They know they have to make a tough budget call because the growth in the NDIS is unsustainable. No one would disagree with that. So it is, the challenge now is to do that in a way that doesn't reduce these supports that young people and families rely on. That, as Michelle said, that is going to need a really, really close, sustained relationship between state ministers and federal ministers to make sure that all those things are ironed out. But something does have to happen.
And the interface with education is so critical. Yeah. Thank you. I could talk about that all day, but I'll keep going. So we did see at the start of the year the commencement of the 3-day guarantee by the Commonwealth Government, which took away the activity test for the first 3 days of early childhood education and care. Could you share with us what you understand to be a universal system? And what that might look like in South Australia. And a number of you have talked about undersupply and service gaps. I think if I can say one thing I think that South Australia is doing really well is paying attention to the birth to 3 age group and not just focusing on preschool rollout at the risk of knocking over the services for younger children. But you do have some unique challenges in terms of how dispersed your population is. So what do you see is the answer there?
We do. Biggest childcare desert in Australia is in the federal seat of Grey, something that I am painfully aware of, but we have had some good wins. And, I'd like to remind people, because it's uncommon for, at least in some people's minds, for Labor governments to be making investments in areas like Kimber, Corn, Kadina, Kingston, and I hope Bordertown. Often we get, in some cases unfairly, I think, characterised as not focusing on anything past north of Jepps Cross. We have made big efforts with the federal government to try to solve childcare deserts in those parts of South Australia. There's a lot more to go, there's no doubt about it, but it is hard for the reason that you pointed out, Sam, is that we have such a dispersed population, and it's very hard to get the critical mass in some of those areas to incentivise the market to have a private operator come, which won't happen. As Michelle touched upon, often it needs to have an infrastructure component as well. So I think that line between what is a federal government responsibility and what is a state government responsibility has, in the last 4 years, shifted more into the state sort of sphere. We are doing more in that space than we have ever done, but we are doing it because if we don't, we will never solve these problems. And as I tried to make the point in my introductory remarks, it is not just because, as Rob said in his comments, those families deserve it no matter where they live and no matter their financial means or background of those families, but we are amidst a skills shortage of the type that we have never seen. And I can promise you that when we're feeling that in a metropolitan area, regional areas are feeling it even more. And there are skilled people, disproportionately women, who can't get back into the workforce or increase their hours at work because they can't get childcare. Bad result for the parent, really bad result for the South Australian economy, bad result for the local employer who has someone who might be a highly skilled worker that they need and who wants to work in their employ who can't do it because there's no childcare. So a lot more to do, but I think we have shown a willingness as a state government. We will put money in for things that previously were not regarded as our responsibility, if that's what it takes to actually address these things.
Thank you. Michelle, did you want to add?
Very much. I've heard the same stories that Blair has in places like Robe and Bordertown as well, where, there are working mums who, would be working but for the fact that they can't get access to childcare. So I think some capital investment in those areas would go a long way to assisting and just making it financially stack up. The centre can run on federal combination of the federal funding arrangements as well as the fees that parents pay, and that might get them over the line. But also I think the things that Commissioner Gillard talked about with progressive universalism. So if we're talking about the vulnerable cohort, making sure that we've got targeted supports towards them just to make sure that they're getting that uplift in support in those early years.
Thank you. And Robert?
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd add is it's a question of priorities and where governments invest their money. I mean, I think it was pretty telling that we had the Prime Minister here in Adelaide a few weeks ago now splashing $30 billion at AUKUS. Now, I don't agree with AUKUS, but whatever your views are on that relationship we have with the United States, the government can find the money for those projects, yet why can't it find the money to invest in childcare, in education, in the essential public services that we need? And so I do think we need to have a shift collectively in priorities. Certainly one of the things I try to bring into the Parliament is trying to push the conversation in that direction.
Thank you. I'm going to touch on a slightly controversial topic that's really playing out more at the Commonwealth level than the state level, but there have been calls for increasing flexibility in providing financial support for families who choose, for example, to engage nannies or grandparents, and this was a question that came from a couple of our delegates. Do you have a view on this or a party position on this?
Well, I guess I would say I think there's a campaign that's been run on by some former Liberal Party staffers, at least my understanding, what I read in the media. I understand the need for flexibility. I'm not sure that taxpayer money should go towards supporting nannies. I think in terms of the way that the Greens approach that is we would like to see an expansion of paid parental leave and make sure that those arrangements are in place. And also, of course, an expansion of childcare and early education being made available as well.
Thank you. Michelle?
Look, at a state level, I think we're agnostic on it. I think it's possibly more of an issue for the federal government rather than us having a view.
Absolutely. This is a federal discussion, but nonetheless, as Michelle would know, being a former minister, you get dragged into these things routinely, and it's probably better that I just offer my views now than being dragged there unwillingly. My issue with it is more that, as Rob has pointed out too, it is about priorities for government. It's always about priorities. There are lots of things that need to be done and good things that should be done. There isn't always the money to do all of them. It's up to governments to decide what their priorities are. My concern with it would be the amount of money that could be spent on essentially subsidising the employment perhaps of one nanny who may care for at most a handful of kids, as opposed to that money being put towards something perhaps like centre-based care in a childcare desert, which could stretch further and support more kids. And I think that's particularly true of our state with the childcare deserts that we have. I understand there are some circumstances where families don't have access to centre-based care. That would be true of some families in South Australia as well. But given that money is not limitless, I think it's important that we remain as disciplined as we can in terms of sending it where it can do the most good.
Thank you all. And I just didn't want to look like we were avoiding it because it is quite topical at the moment and it did come up. ECA was involved in flexibility trials some years ago and we're happy to share the research evidence on that. But we would suggest that nannies have been tried in the past and it wasn't particularly successful. There isn't a big workforce ready and willing to work under those circumstances. But anyway, we can leave that to the federal political parties to navigate that argument. I'm glad we've ticked it off. In terms of another area that was of interest to a number of our delegates tonight was the support that ACO-led services need to establish and operate. And I know there's some really innovative co-design work going on in South Australia. And perhaps this is an opportunity just to talk briefly to that and how you see that working going forward.
Yeah, I'm happy to kick off on this. If I don't get to do this job beyond Saturday week, one of the things that I'll be most proud of, that I'm confident that no one will ever read about in a newspaper or see on TV ever, is the work that we've done as part of Flying Start to co-design the delivery with ACOs, Aboriginal Community Controlled Organisations. It was a really long and thorough process done in the kind of way that governments too rarely do. Often it's lip service. We can all be guilty of this. And, the engagement's not really deep and done in a genuine way. And we really tried hard with that. And we did it because A, it's the right thing to do. B, it's often young Aboriginal kids who need that extra support that a second year of teacher-led play-based learning can deliver. And if we had to build that sense of respect and trust between Aboriginal communities and our providers, then we need to do it in a thorough way, and we have. And I'm really pleased that we've done it. And I hope it acts as a bit of a model for future departments and ministers to say there are ways of doing this really thoroughly where both parties walk away feeling like it was done in a meaningful and genuine way.
Thank you. Michelle?
Thank you. I'm pleased to hear that work plan is progressing because I was hoping that was part of what was taking place. And certainly my own experience within DHS, we particularly took this approach as well with Aboriginal community controlled organisations, both the youth justice sector and the families programs in particular. We actually determined that we would ring fence specific funding because we recognised that those groups were overrepresented. And I used to stand up at things and say, I'm a white chick, I can't solve your problems, you tell us and we'll fund you to do it. So I think that's the only approach that makes sense, that the people who know the cohort the best should be the ones who co-design these programs.
Yeah, there's not really anything much for me to add there. Co-design, absolutely. We should be actually drawing on the expertise of the people that are directly affected. So absolutely, that's an approach we would take.
Excellent. Now, I have some questions left, but I think we should open up to the floor. So has anybody got a question ready to go? Or shall I ask one more while you have a think? The problem with these things is they're always slow to start and then we run out of time. All right, I might ask a workforce question, and then, but please, raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question. Robert, I might start with you on this one because you've mentioned the workforce challenges that the sector is facing and the importance of that, and I think particularly, there's a need for early childhood professionals to feel recognised and respected. That's a common complaint that we hear from people in the sector. And I mean, that is about job security, as you've mentioned, but it's also about pay and conditions, career pathways, using respectful language. It's also about attending to the health and wellbeing of educators. Do you have ideas on how that could be progressed, perhaps jointly across the party? It doesn't need to be a party political approach, but what would you see as the priorities?
Yeah, I think looking after children is actually one of the most important functions that anyone can perform in our society. It's vitally important, and I think all of us have touched on that tonight. I think part of how we demonstrate that respect for that work is by ensuring that there's appropriate legislative protections. That means trying to reduce the level of casualisation that might be occurring within that industry. It also means, I think, making sure that there's enough government funding to ensure there's long-term employment opportunities so that we can, as I say, reduce that level of casualisation, and also access to ongoing training and support as well. And again, the government playing a role in that so that it's not hugely costly for individuals to undertake that work themselves.
Thanks. Yes, and someone who's got a child who's been a consumer, I'm very, very personally appreciative both of the kindergarten sector and childcare for the work that everybody in this room does every day with our youngest people. I think there's probably a piece of work that the Office for Early Childhood could be doing to consult with ways that we can better improve the conditions and pathways for people in the sector, and also perhaps identifying which parts of the system where people are having the most turnover in terms of leaving and moving into other areas as well, because if we are to make sure that this part of the sector gets the attention that it needs and continues to be sustainable into the future, then we certainly need to receive that feedback about what it is that might be the disincentives for people to be retained in the workforce. Obviously, there's always enterprise bargaining agreements and those sorts of arrangements that can be part of the system, but sometimes it's the things that are external to pay. Certainly know from other sectors, whether it's burnout or those sorts of issues, that we need to make sure that we're protecting everybody who, looks forward to working with the sector and making sure that they don't end up after a couple of years deciding that it's really not for them.
Yeah, I agree with the comments made by both Rob and Michelle, but there's a few specific things I thought I should mention, and not all things that the state government could take credit for, but important, I think, nonetheless. Big Steps campaign finally bore fruit after many years, and a lot of work by unions like United Workers Union, but even more importantly, staff in centres standing up, making a noise about it. So that's a really great thing. Multi-employer bargaining has occurred, I think, quite successfully as well. United Workers Union have been a part of that. I think that's a really promising model for the future. And then in terms of South Australia and something the state government's done, because Rob has rightfully touched upon levels of permanency in contract work, and we have tried to address that, but not just in public primary and secondary schools. And I can tell you that in 2025, in government preschools, we converted as many people in that single year from contract to permanency as had been converted in 10 years in total before that. So a decade's worth in a single year. And that, I think, shows the very, very low base we were coming off, but it also shows that we're serious about it, and we're doing it at a time when there are not just national teacher shortages or educator shortages, but this is an international phenomenon, and I can tell you it's not going away anytime soon. So this conversation we're all having here about the importance of addressing insecure work in areas like this is going to remain really important, and if we get another crack at government, we're going to see if we can pick that pace up a bit more with conversions to permanency.
Thank you.
Hi there. My question is around workforce, and so for me specifically, I've got an interest in OSH. So we run out of school hours care services across the state, and I was interested to see the recent election promise regarding the additional opening of services in those childcare deserts, which I think is amazing for those communities, and I think it sort of is a good continuation of the current government's work on implementing the recommendations of the Royal Commission. But I guess my concern is, as we've noted around the current shortages, and there's been comment around how that's exacerbated in rural areas. So we've been a provider that's for the last 10 years tried to operate in rural communities, and not because they help us make money, but because, we're passionate about supporting South Australian areas, and we've just found it almost impossible and have had to exit quite a number of sites that have been then part of the pre-election promise to reopen in those areas. The reason that we exited was that they were financially unviable, but we can cop that if we have a committed staff team there to be able to continue to run them. And we've just found that that's nigh on impossible to get people with the right diploma, qualifications in those rural areas to support those small communities. And so I guess my question is around, sorry, just one other, part that ties into that is one of the other. So what will the elected parties be able to do to address skills shortages, particularly in rural communities when it is such a highly regulated area, and a lack of those people mean that it's not a delayed project, it's a service that closes its doors for a day or a week or forever. So how do we get those staff in?
Thank you for the question, and I certainly don't disagree with your characterisation of the issues faced in regional areas, and opportunity for me to give a quick plug to the election commitment we did make around $45 million over 4 years to increase access to out-of-school hours care at 68 public primary school sites across the state, including a lot of regional sites. One of the things that we are funding as part of that announcement is a workforce strategy for OSH, which has been missing essentially forever. Just like the early years has been overlooked for too long, so is out-of-school hours care, and that is why the Premier has made a number of announcements about what happens before and after school this week as part of our Active Kids policy, because the way I always think of it is the world has changed drastically, but we are still stuck with the same school hours that we did essentially 150 years ago. But parents are working. It's hard to do drop-offs and pick-ups, giving kids things to do away from screens. All those things are really important, and OSH plays an incredibly important role in that. And just like access to childcare is an economic lever to enable people who want to go back into the workforce or increase their hours at work to do so, so is OSH, because otherwise someone's there at 3:15 picking up the kids. And sometimes they need to be at work. So we are doing that. But in terms of how we find staff, particularly at hard-to-staff locations in regional parts of the state, a big part of that $45 million we have announced is actually a workforce plan for the first time for OSH to see how we can grow that. And we've even broken that down to how many additional staff we need to roll it out. And I think for the first 4 years, it's 113 extra staff. And just in the same way we have broken that down and built upon it to roll out 3-year-old preschool, if we are re-elected, we'll do it in exactly the same way as we roll out those additional 68 sites across the state.
Yeah, thanks. I probably can't be as specific as the Minister, but just, to say that, OSH, I think, is as critical to a lot of families in regional South Australia as childcare is, so it'd certainly be more than willing to have a look at that and take it up and work out what the gaps are that need to be addressed.
I think you can't attract people to move to regional areas to do vital work if there isn't housing, and that's one of the areas that the Greens have really been advocating for more of a focus on during this election campaign. I welcome the fact that the Malinowskis government have stopped selling off our public housing stock. Same can't be said for previous Labor governments. This one haven't done that, and I welcome that. But we do need to see more housing built at scale, and social housing being made available to workers in key industries that we need. And I see OSH, childcare as being key vital industries, along with education and health, and housing should be a priority for those people, particularly in the regions, if we're going to make it attractive for people to move there and do that work.
Thank you, and I thought I'd stand up here because I can't help weighing in, but if we can just plant a seed, there has been a crash in people doing their diploma, and there's an OSH-specific diploma that I don't think has been widely taken up yet. But the review of the qualifications gives us an opportunity to have a conversation about that, and I do think that there's a role for the Parliament and the government in the future to help us with that particular problem. But thank you for raising the issue. I think we've got time for one more question before we need to start wrapping up and give everyone a final minute.
Thank you. I am a New South Wales, I'm from Bean Early Education in New South Wales, and we have been very lucky to establish 3 services in South Australia in the last 3 years, and I'm loving it. I'm loving the travelling. My question is that we see a very high percentage of young children, even though we say that every child deserves to access quality education, is not able to access early education due to different visa status. And I brought this up in our ECA meeting last year as well in the Christmas time. And I really would like any political party to look at. I just interviewed one family who came with tears this afternoon in our Prospect Centre, who can afford $150 per day per child if we are not supporting them. And if we are attracting a lot of students and other working visas to support our workforce here, who's looking after their children? Yeah, please have a kind heart to look at that. And it's so many children out there that, because especially I'm from Sri Lanka and foreign background, that people come look into. And what we as service providers can do very little, because with the cost of rent and cost of staffing and how much discount we can give them. So I have a couple who from Sri Lanka. They were qualified from a very high university as lecturer. As engineers and lecturing in Sri Lanka. Here now she's in a scholarship even, and the child is down with autism as well, but they don't get a penny from the government.
So I can just clarify, they're not eligible for the childcare subsidy.
Yeah.
That's what's preventing them from accessing.
Yeah, there's a high percentage of children out there. Please look after them. And we do our little bit.
Thank you for that. I'm happy to answer on behalf of all 3 of us, unless Michelle and Rob want to have a go, which of course they can. I think that's worthy of representations from whoever is the minister in my role after the 21st of March to ask about what the rules are there and ask for some explanations around why that doesn't change. That's probably the best answer I can offer you, but thank you for raising it.
Yeah, I totally agree with Blair's comments. I think the only point I'd make, and I think your question touches on the value of migration to our broader economy, and I do think one of the really regrettable things about this election campaign is that we have seen some candidates, and one political party in particular that's not represented today, spreading fear and misinformation about migrants and the huge contribution that they make and the vital role they play in a whole range of different industries. So I think your point's an important one.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Now, each of you has 1 minute to make any other points that you didn't get to say earlier, or to respond to any of the other issues that have been raised tonight. Would you like to go first, Robert?
Look, thank you very much for the opportunity tonight and for your thoughtful questions. I guess my parting message is, whether you support Blair's party or Michelle's party in the lower house, I'd encourage you to support the Greens in the upper house, because it is vitally important that we have a strong third party, your third party insurance if you like, that can hold the next government to account to make sure that they deliver on their election commitments and to push to try and get better outcomes for this sector. And I'm certainly not a policy expert in this area, but I am somebody who is passionate about making sure that everybody gets a fair start in life. So please know that you'll have a sympathetic ear from the Greens, and that we will absolutely do what we can to elevate the perspectives of this sector when it comes to legislation before the Parliament, and also urging the next government to do better and to go further and faster on the reforms that we know we need.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think this sector's got a very bright future. I think your support, regardless of whichever political party is in government, is absolutely secure, and our doors are always open, regardless of whether in government or opposition or, in... Well, I can't speak for Rob, he already has. But our doors are always open on all of these issues. So whether we're in government or not, we look forward to continuing the extremely valuable relationship and respecting the diversity and the wisdom that is in this room and amongst your members and across all parts of the sector for the best outcomes for our young children.
Thanks, Michelle, and thank you, Sam, and thank you, everyone, for tonight. Again, just to reiterate what I said at the start, I really do appreciate the efforts that the ECA have gone to put this forum on tonight. It is really refreshing to have a focus on the early years in the lead up to a state election, and I mean that. I think Michelle and Rob mean that as well, so I don't take for granted the work that Sam and your team have done to put this on. I do think it's an exciting time for your sector. I know people's eyes glaze over when they hear politicians say it's an exciting time to be alive or anything like that. But yeah, that's right. But there are people in this room, who have done the hard yards for decades and through some pretty difficult times when, the early years were not prioritised in any way. There was no public or national debate or media discussion about it in the way there is now. In terms of my own party, more than 4 years ago, we kicked off with our first big pre-election commitment that Peter Malinauskas made was to deliver 3-year-old preschool. And that was important in a number of ways because I think it would be the first time really that any state leader had actually, or in that case opposition leader, had started an election campaign with a commitment about the early years as the biggest, in his mind, most important thing we could do. And we have done it despite the fact that it isn't the thing, to be frank, that lands on the front page of a newspaper or leads the news bulletins or is likely to change a whole heap of votes. We have done it because it is the right and the important thing to do. And I think it is rare in the jobs that Michelle, Rob and I get to do that we get to be a part of something that will outlast us, and perhaps that the true importance of will only be felt long after we are gone. For me, that is one of those things. But I want to tonight just thank all those in the room who've kept the flame alive on the early years for years and years and years to get us to this point now where it's actually, a big item that we have premiers and prime ministers talk about as being priorities for them.
Thank you. I think a big round of applause. I just want to sincerely thank each of you for making the time tonight. We know how hectic an election campaign is, and it's. I think it is really important that we keep the early years front and centre, but it's always tricky because what we want is bipartisan and multi-party support on important policy areas, which doesn't tend to attract the media attention that conflict and difference does between political parties. And I have to say I've done a number of these type of state election forums over the years with ECA, and I just really welcome the collegiate approach that each of you have brought tonight, the points of consensus and the points of difference, but made with respect and courtesy, and the level of articulate conversation that we've had, not always the case, I have to say, in state election forums. So I certainly think there's been a real change over the last 10 years in terms of the importance of early childhood education and care and the attention that it's receiving from our parliamentarians, and we're very grateful for that, but it is also very much the work of all the early childhood professionals that have brought that about. So thank you to everybody, and thank you to the South Australian Committee that have made this possible tonight. And I'm going to hand over to Eleanor to send us all on our way. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Eleanor. I'm the Deputy Chair of ECA SA Committee. And just in case you missed it, I would also like to say thank you to the 3 panellists for attending tonight, taking time out of your very busy schedules to come and share your priorities with us. And thank you to Sam for travelling this morning to come and be with us and for facilitating this very important conversation. So Hugh has been running around in the background, very busy. He has recorded this session for us, and ECA will be making this available for access as soon as possible after some quick editing. So we just ask you to please assist us in making this in sharing this conversation amongst all of your colleagues and your friends so that we can increase the reach of everything that's been said. And we would also invite you to encourage your friends and families to engage with the recording and to consider this conversation as we head into the election very soon. And don't forget to vote. Thank you again, and have a lovely evening.